Hello there, YouTube. Today I'd like to give you a concise buyer's guide to selecting a ballistic rifle plate. So, the first thing we need to understand is plate ratings. Now, plate ratings are 3 or 4. NIJ 3, now National Institute of Justice 3, refers to the ability to stop 6 hits properly spaced apart of M80 ball, which is the U.S. military designation for 7.62 by 51, that is a 147 grain full metal jacket boat tail projectiles. That's just a lead core with a copper jacket that out of 24-inch barrel will go 2,780 feet per second. So right off the bat, that's a multi-hit rating right there. Additionally, ratings include a blunt force trauma. So the way this is done is the plate is placed up against some clay, and the amount of backface deformation will that's imparted into the clay. So the depth of the cavity that is punched into the clay by the energy that would be transmitted into your body, even if the bullet didn't actually perforate the plate, is measured. So if you hear this myth that, oh, well, you would stop the bullet, but you would still die due to X, Y, and Z, your organs, etc., please understand that it is nonsense. Ratings are ratings. Then the next rating we're going to see is NIJ4, which is the ability to stop a 30-06 M2 AP black tip round. That's an armor piercing round with a hardened tool steel penetrator and a 50% chance of stopping a second. So that's effectively 1.5 projectiles. Now, these ratings can be standalone or in conjunction with. In conjunction with is usually represented as ICW. Standalone is what it sounds like, and then ICW means it requires a piece of 3A armor behind it to achieve this rating. You'll sometimes see plates that are standalone level 3s and ICW 4s. Now, you may have noticed that I have not referred to 5.56 in these ratings, and that's because the NIJ3 rating does not include coverage from 5.56. When you see the all lesser threats on manufacturers' websites, they're referring to 3A, or more precisely said, level 1 through 3A, which are pistol projectiles. So right off the bat, 5.56 is going to be our biggest concern here. Well, why? Because the AR-15 is probably the most common rifle in America, and 5.56 NATO, the M193 and M855 are very commonly available. You can find them at a Big Five. So the most common armor that we see is steel. And within that, the most common type is going to be a level 3 AR500. That's abrasion resistant steel at 500 Bernal hardness. It's usually about 1/4 of an inch thick. This is an NIJ3 plate. The issue is just because it can stop 6 hits of M80 does not mean it can take M193. The muzzle velocity of an M193 5.56 round out of the quote-unquote M forgery, so that common AR-15 that looks like an M4, right, is 3,100 feet per second out of a 16.5-inch barrel. That means that all these people running around with these AR-500 plates, assuming that because their level 3 plate can stop 308, that it will protect them against a commonly available M193 round, that's an assumption that is not rooted in anything. They are effectively unarmored for that situation. Now, to be fair, a rifle fight is not very likely, but if a rifle fight did occur, an AR-15 being present is very likely, and M193 being present is extremely likely. So we run into that problem with level 3 steel plates. How can one remedy this? Well, there are ultra high hardness versions of these steel plates. You can get, for example, this is a caddy armor plate that's AR600. That is rated to take 5.56 at 3,100 feet per second, which is cutting it a little close, but that's the muzzle velocity of a common AR-15, so that'll work. Now, when we look at steel, there are a few problems. It's very heavy. This is an 8-pound piece of body armor. Additionally, its price tends to, better said, the advantage of a low price tends to be lost a little bit when you go into those higher hardnesses. So you can get, especially when you buy like 2 plates in a set, a level 3 steel plate for about $50. A level 3 plus is usually around $100 per plate. The next problem is going to be what's often referred to as SPAL, even though that is really not an accurate term. So just really quickly, what SPAL actually is, it's a term that comes from armored vehicles, where sometimes you may not be able to actually pierce the armor of an armored vehicle, but you can hit it with a kinetic round that'll cause the inside face of the armor to splinter off. So you have not actually perforated the armor, but those splinters can kill or injure crewmen. That's what spallation is. What actually happens when you shoot steel, and assuming the steel stops the bullet, is it does not penetrate the plate. Remember, perforation is in one face, out the other, right? Penetration is actually entering and getting stuck in the plate. That doesn't happen with steel. What bullets do when they hit steel is they splatter. Now, spall is one of these things where I feel that people either make a huge deal out of it or they pretend it's not an issue. And neither of these approaches are correct. People who act like it's going to kill you are full of it, because most of the spall comes out in a 20-degree cone, the larger pieces that carry some energy to them. The stuff that goes along the strike face is very small projectiles with very little energy. Now, you can find videos of people shooting a plate that's in a plate carrier and disassembling the plate carrier with that spall, but let's understand, they shoot it 20 times. So that's not really realistic. And even that nasty spall is really only going to cut up your forearms, if anything at all. How can we mitigate spall? Okay, so my recommended method for mitigating spall if you choose steel armor is a spall jacket. This is 3 or 4 layers of an aramid material, and this is not like 3A armor, but this will catch that shrapnel essentially. However, what's commonly sold by manufacturers is something called a build-up coat. Now, you can see the shiny material that's on all 3 of these pieces of armor here. This is a polyura truck bed liner type material. It's tougher than truck bed liner, but it's effectively the same stuff. Now, they will build up a 2-pound coat on the surface of a steel plate, and it will further aggravate the price of the finished product, because these things can range from $40 to $80 to have this service done, and it adds 2 pounds. So you have an 8-pound piece of armor. You're looking at a 10-pound piece of body armor. I wouldn't recommend it. I got this on sale for like $25, but you can find these usually for no more than $50. I would say you really only need the front plate jacketed, and I would call that sufficient spall risk mitigation. Moving on to, I would say, the next relatively common type of armor for civilians on the commercial market is going to be a polyethylene laminate. Now, polyethylene armor is made of something called ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene. It is several sheets, well, more than several, of a thin material that you could actually use in place of Kevlar in a soft, flexible ballistic vest, right? Laminated together. Now, the advantage of this is that because we're talking about plastic, you actually have something that's positively buoyant, although I think that's overstated. Even if I was wearing a plate carrier with plates, and if I fell in the water, I'm taking that thing off because I have a lot more than armor on it. But aside from that, it's very lightweight. So like a 10 by 12 polyethylene plate will usually be, 3.3, 3.5 pounds. Compare that to an 8-pound plate, and that's clearly an excellent weight savings. However, it is rather thick, and that can deform plate carriers in odd ways that might not be super comfortable, especially plates on the side, and it's usually really expensive. Now, the problem is an NIJ3 polyethylene plate, again, can be rated to take 6 hits of M80, but M855, which is the other super common 5.56 NATO round that you can find at a sporting goods store, will cut through it, because that soft material laminated together is designed to pop apart and dissipate energy. M855 has a steel tip to it, so it essentially cuts through it. So we have, again, a problem of an NIJ3 plate that will not stop an extremely common round that people can load into their AR-15s. So what's the solution? There are polyethylene plates that are even thicker and even more expensive that will take M855. I would submit that the problem is that they end up getting over 4 pounds. Some of them are like 4.4 pounds. And when a ceramic option is maybe 5.5 pounds, the advantage in weight savings combined with the fact they're even thicker and even more expensive makes them dubious, in my opinion. But if you're really committed to polyethylene for whatever reason, that would be the way to go. So if we're looking at a non-ceramic plate, I would say NIJ3 is insufficient protection for those materials. You're either going to need an AR-600 or similarly hard steel that can take M193 at 3,100 feet per second with ideally a spall jacket, or you're going to need an extraordinarily thick polyethylene plate that can take M855. So you might be thinking, why don't we go with ceramic? And I would say ceramic is probably your best bet. Now, there's a myth surrounding ceramic that it is extraordinarily prone to cracking. First of all, this is not even an issue to begin with. It's much ado about nothing, because if you look at a type of ceramic called a mosaic, it'll be multiple hexagons simply pressed together. They're not overlapping. I'm not describing flexible armor systems. This is a solid rifle plate. That really expensive mosaic you bought comes pre-built with cracks in it. And remember, NIJ3 means 6 hits. What do you think happens to the strike face when it is hit by the first bullet? So this idea, this paranoia that if there's some hairline fracture that is only detectable with an x-ray machine in the first place, that all of a sudden your plate is no longer reliable protection, it is ridiculous. Additionally, on top of that, people will say, well, that the plates are fragile. Okay, most commercially available ceramic plates are going to be made of something called alumina or aluminum oxide. That is a high 8 on the Mohs scale. Now, unfortunately, because it is relatively soft compared to other ceramics, you need a thicker piece, meaning the plate is heavier than the competitive options. However, that softness means that it's very tough. This is a similar concept to tempering a tool like a knife blade after it's been heat treated. You want to soften it down from glass hard. Now, the other options for ceramic material are going to be silicon carbide and boron carbide. They are both low 9s on the Mohs scale. So when you look at the Sappy generation, so this is sort of Iraq invasion time period, the most common material was typically a silicon carbide. Now, silicon carbide, from what I understand from some articles I have read from publications that are intended for people who work in the ceramics industry, apparently, despite the fact that it is ballistically more or less interchangeable with boron carbide, apparently it is more fragile. So the handle with care labels, from what I understand, came about after the introduction of silicon carbide as a common armor material. However, again, let's also understand that just because it's the most fragile out of the three does not mean it's going to crack because you look at it the wrong way. Now, perhaps be somewhat careful if you get silicon carbide. You will be careful with boron carbide because it's very expensive. And with boron carbide, it is interesting that for the ESAPI generation, which is towards the late 2010s, the military showed a preference for boron carbide construction. So apparently there is something to that where silicon carbide can be a bit fragile. However, if you're buying a ballistic rifle plate as a civilian, you're almost certainly getting aluminum oxide in the first place. So this entire issue, as I said before, is much ado about nothing. So when we look into ceramic rifle plates, the good news is that you're sort of in the middle on weight, you're sort of in the middle on thickness, and you're in the middle on cost. And you don't have to worry about vulnerability to M855 or M193. Ceramic does not have those material weaknesses that polyethylene or steel does. Now, there's a bit of a unicorn round we're going to discuss that apparently the US military is in the process of adopting, but they also have next generation weapon systems programs going on. So I'm not exactly sure how common it is even currently in military service, or how common it will become, or if it will ever become commonly available on the commercial market. However, this round is called the M855A1. Now, that round apparently will defeat even the M855 resistant polyethylene in most of the M193 resistant steel plates. So, with that said, the ceramic, if you're looking forward in time, is perhaps the better option. So, how is it that I have described two different levels of polyethylene and steel plates, but I'm still referring to the ceramic as simply a 3? One of the things you will commonly see manufacturers do is they will market their steel plates as 3 or 3 plus, or their polyethylenes as 3 or 3 plus. See, the thing is, plus doesn't really mean anything because plus is not an NIJ designation. This is a manufacturer invention, and it usually means for steel that it can take M193 at 3,100 feet per second, and it usually means for polyethylene that it can take M855. The problem is, because it's not a real NIJ designation, you need to look at the actual documents for the plate to see what it genuinely means. I'm not going to mention the company because I don't want to start any drama, but there is a manufacturer that sells a ultra high hardness, let's say roughly AR600 hardness steel plate as a 3 plus. However, it is 2/10 of an inch thick instead of a 1/4 of an inch thick. So it actually really isn't rated for 55 grain 5.56 at a significantly higher velocity than their standard plate. It's not able to take it at muzzle velocity for the average carbine barrel length. It's not rated for 3,100 feet per second. But if you're just an uninformed buyer, you see the plus, you buy, and you think you're protected, but you're not. So again, you need to look into this. Now, when we start talking about ceramics, we can suddenly start talking about NIJ4. So again, in case you forgot, NIJ4 is the ability to stop one 30-06 M2 AP black tip round with a 50% chance of stopping another. So I generally think that NIJ4 is a bit superfluous, similarly to how the M855A1, the chances of being shot with that in the here and now, even if you got into a rifle fight, are fairly remote. The chances of being shot with black tip AP ammo are remote because, from what I understand, it's not standard issue for an infantry platoon. So even if you were shot at by a National Guardsman for some reason, the chances that he's firing black tip at you would not be high. And then what are the chances you're going to be shot at by some old timer with a Garand, or Garand if you prefer that has, black tip ammo in it? However, it ultimately is up to you. But the reason I generally don't like level 4 plates is because it seems to be becoming increasingly difficult to find an ICW4 standalone 3. If you can, that's ideal because the standalone level 3 plate that can also function as an ICW4 is usually marginally heavier and marginally more expensive than a standalone 3. So that would be ideal. But the problem is people often want to get level 4 plates that are standalone. They're around 8 pounds, give or take half a pound. And oftentimes they are constructed with a mosaic construction. So we described earlier, a mosaic is when you have several hexagons put together, whereas compared to most commonly a monolithic strike face, you could actually see the tile that this plate is made with. So why go with the mosaic? Again, with level 4, it's really only rated for 1.5 hits. So they're attempting to market a plate that can take more hits, that can give you that ability to stop black tip, but with the repeated hit capability of an NIJ3 plate against standard M80 ball. So how well that actually works, I'm not going to comment on. We'll just take the manufacturer's word for it. But that drives up costs. Now, this is an issue that has been exposed in recent years. So from what I understand, it's being ameliorated. However, just be aware of it. Oftentimes with mosaic plates, what you'll actually have is, let's say in a 10 by 12 plate, you'll have an 8 by 10 mosaic strike face. Obviously, that's not cool. I would rather 10 by 12 1.5 hits than 8 by 10 6 hits. With that said, and remember, the actual plate in your carrier is still 10 by 12 in terms of the amount of space it takes up. So moving forward, I would recommend for the average person a monolithic construction aluminum oxide tile with a polyethylene laminate backer, 10 by 12 single curve ceramic rifle plate of the NIJ3 standalone or NIJ3 standalone / NIJ4 ICW. That's what I think is best. Now, we should also speak a little bit on plate sizing. So most plates that you're going to find in the market are going to be a Sappy extra small, medium, or extra large. That corresponds to an 8 by 10, a 10 by 12, or an 11 by 14. So 8 by 10, in my opinion, for the average man is ridiculously small. It was perfectly sized for one of my ex-girlfriends some years back. She was 5'2" and like 98 pounds, and it fit her chest perfectly. So unless that describes you, 8 by 10 should be out of the question. 10 by 12 seems to fit most men. Now, I am not a huge guy, but I have a wider torso than is normal for my height. So I found the 10 by 12 to be a bit on the small side. I was lucky enough to find a Sappy size large. For whatever reason, Sappy size small and Sappy size large are just typically not commercially available. I have seen commercial Sappy, and by the way, this is not a DoD military surplus Sappy. This is a commercial reproduction of a Sappy plate. Now, there's a company called Ukraine Armor that manufactures these commercial reproductions, I believe Sappy and E-Sappy plates, and correspondingly they also have those small and large sizes. So Sappy size large, in my case, is 10 and a quarter by 13 and 3/4. So it's only a 1/4 inch wider than the medium, but it's nearly as long as the XL. And for me, that was perfect because I wanted that extra coverage down low, but I wanted the ability to mount a rifle as easily as the 10x12. So now that we're on the topic of mounting a rifle, let's talk about the cut of the plate. So all the plates you see here have what's referred to as a sappy cut. Now, you'll sometimes see something called a shooter's cut, which is where there'll be a slightly more aggressive cut here. It's usually right or left-handed. That's fine. What I highly recommend you avoid is the swimmer's cut. The swimmer's cut uses a extremely aggressive cut. So it's exposing the top of your lungs. And then to boot, there's often a cut down low. So it's exposing the bottom of your lung. And at that point, I think you're just playing with fire. So I would say definitely don't go a size up in swimmer's cut just for the heck of it. Now, where does this issue come from? So people will sometimes run into a problem where in order to wear their plate correctly, which is basically what's called the sternal notch, so the top of the plate should be right at the collarbone to actually get coverage of the heart and great vessels. In order to do that, they sacrifice the ability to mount their rifle. So a lot of people from more civilian target shooting are accustomed to mounting their rifle with the top of the stock or the head of the stock in the pocket of it's not really the shoulder, but we'll call it the shoulder. And that does seem to interfere with a sappy cut plate. When I shoot, I put the toe of the stock in the pocket. I have more of an actual sort of a jaw weld, I guess you could describe it as. It's a different style of shooting, more commonly seen in the isosceles shooting stance, as opposed to the older Weaver stance, and I don't have a problem with that. Now, I would say if your options are shoot with that more Weaver style cheek weld and have the plate be way too low versus go with a more aggressive cut and shoot the way you can, maybe go with a more aggressive cut, but ideally have the more protective cut and use the shooting style that's intended to be used with it. Now, the next thing we need to discuss is going to be the plate curvature. So right off the bat, I got this from Caddy Armor on a closeout. I got it for more armoring stuff than me. This is a flat plate. I highly recommend against it. This is extraordinarily uncomfortable. You will regret the purchase. Avoid flat plates like the plague. On the other end of the comfort spectrum, we have a multi-curve. This is often called a triple curve. Different manufacturers have different styles, but this is sort of the classic way to go about it. In fact, Caddy Armor actually manufactures something called a combat quad band, where the top curvature radius is inward again to sort of be concealable. And I actually, just out of interest, I put this in a concealable carrier, and I found that the thing that absolutely gave it away was the top. So there might be something to that. This is the most comfortable design, but one of the problems with it is if the plate is a bit too small for you. So let's say you're my size guy and you buy a 10x12 when what you really need is probably more like a Sappy large or even an XL. And then you are going to find that these corners are going to dig into your back in a way that is unbelievably uncomfortable. You're going to loosen the plate carrier, and then you're going to have the plate riding way too low. And you'll find that when you do that, think of it like this. Would you rather carry 20 pounds in a backpack or in two 10-pound weights on your boots? The closer stuff is to your core, the easier it is to move, the less heavy it actually feels. That's the advantage of these triple curves, is that it gets the actual armor closer to your body. But this really only works if you know what size plate your body requires. The single curve is a compromise. It doesn't have the same sort of aggressive lower corner. However, it also doesn't ride too close to the body, as you can see. Again, it's just a simple single curve. But at the price of having a lower sort of ultimate level of comfort, it's also a lot more forgiving in plate size on your body. Again, I would recommend for the average person a NIJ3 standalone, ideally also ICW4 aluminum oxide monolithic face plate with a laminated polyethylene backer. These will usually come in under $200 a plate. They're usually around 5.5 pounds and a single curve with a sappy cut. Hopefully that was helpful. I hope you'll never need to use your plates. God bless.